Alright, so we're going to break down one of these each today, which is a pretty amazing opportunity and a big job there from Humpty Doo to send down a whole fish each for you. Already you can tell, and already like I can assess the texture of the fillet and the texture of the fish itself. Really nice and firm. Barra, even from what we normally handle in retail is wild caught fish, typically a little bit larger, but you don't normally see them brought down in the quality like this. Obviously they're caught and they're harvested and killed to match a time frame for delivery, which you just don't normally get with fishermen. Guys will go out, they'll fish for a day or two, they'll ice it down, and then they'll send when they're ready to meet the market, or meat transport basically. A little bit different, a little bit more organised obviously when you're taking it from a farm. So when we're breaking these guys down, I always use a short, fairly inflexible blade. Most people say to fill it with a filleting knife with plenty of flex. Too much flexion, especially on reef fish, you lose a lot of control. You lose the inability to place the knife exactly where you want, especially on that spine line there. You need a bit of tang and a bit of steel and a bit of width to work with. To get in, a lot of the fish are pretty tightly bound. This fish is pretty tight, so you kind of need to have that. Too much flex and your knife will bend. It leads to often a lot of injuries. I've had a few in the past where I've used the wrong knife for the wrong application, so you learn pretty quick. So always, with a good firm feel and a good firm grip, you want to control your fish as much as you can with good tight handholds. You're pushing your knife in. It's a good solid rake away from that pectoral fin there, away down to its gut. A nice clearing cut all the way through into its shoulder. You want to pull as much meat and as close as you can, and as much meat away from that fillet as you can. So you want to get right up and tight in there. It's about a 30-degree angle to pull that down into the shoulder. A turn of the knife, and when we're cutting all reef fish or any expensive fish, I'm always cutting and looking. Salmon's a little bit different. You can get it, even with the fairly flexible blade, good control and one good long strike along that whole fish. With reef fish and with good quality barramundi, where you want to return as much weight as possible, you're edging in, and only about an inch of your knife is in the fish at any one time. You're working and you're looking. Recovery is really important. The difference between 2 or 3% recovery, and if you've got 100 kilos, is quite significant. So you've got to take your time with them, especially when you're learning, and look all the time. What you're trying to do is just run enough angle that as you're cutting down there, your knife edge is almost completely out the top here. If your knife's exiting and you've got a centimetre or a couple mil gap at the top here, you're too high. So it's edging in, and even now you can already start looking. I'm a little bit high on that area that I've already started. All the way down to the keel, and then we're looking. Just raking that knife down along those lateral bones from the spine. What you're looking for is a fairly clean section here of your spine and all those lateral bones there. You don't want to be leaving too much meat behind here. Even for me, that's too much meat left behind there. Cutting in towards the edge here. A lot of people straight cut here. If you've already gone to that much effort, all you need to do now is roll over these rib bones. You don't need to cut through them at all. Keeps your knife sharper over time, especially if you've got a fair few fish to fillet. So you're just sliding your knife over that rib cage. When you're cutting any fish, all you're trying to do with your hand and your body mechanics is just follow the shapes that are already there. Have a look and have a look at that architecture once you've filleted one, and you get a good idea of that barrel roll shape that you want to be matching with your hands as you're cutting through. Too much force down, you cut through, and you've got to tidy up the fillet later on. Just like that. So that's one full fillet. Much the same. A lot of people say cutting the second side's harder. It's a lot easier. You've got a really flat section now to work on. The fish won't roll around too much. Underneath the anal fin there, all the way through to the keel, slide your knife through. Once again, looking. You're just looking to slide and scrape that knife as cleanly as you can against those bones. Move your fish around. And it's the same process. You're looking just to keep that edge of the knife as close as you can to those top fins that are there, those dorsals. Sliding all the way up. Barramundi in our shop, when we have it, I like to take about 100 kilos at a time, usually for a good day's trade. It sells really, really well. Everyone seems to understand it and know it very well. It's one of the easiest fish you can cut. The fish is very well reinforced, all the bones here, so you're never going to cut through to the other side. You get good yield from each fish. Generally pretty large. fairly large area of meat and very little bone, so you've got little bone here to work with. There's just a couple of pins here, just at this section, like there are on the salmon in that same sort of area, but only a couple there, so all you need to do is nick those out. And that's the only bone in that fillet, which is pretty amazing. I love cutting barra for that reason. Really easy to handle. Push out big volumes pretty quick. So, for the retail, I always keep these. This is tastier than that. I love this. The wings are just beautiful. Salted and floured and deep fried or crispy fried. All of these fronds become edible. It's the laziest part of the fish, basically, other than the cheek. And where you've got lazy muscle, you've got more flavour, you've got more fat. So to throw that away is a huge waste. This is what we normally take home to eat at the end of the day, rather than the fillet. I love it. Just beautiful. I think it presents really well too. Something about them, that the way that they present once they're fried up. They're quite architecture on the plate. You get good height from them too. Obviously the frame for plenty of stock. A lot of flavour from those in the head as well. So skinning is really easy on these guys. So a little bit different knife application. You go to a bit of flexion in your knife and a little bit longer length there as well, so you can cut all the way through it in one cut there. It's just cutting a little slip of meat just to hang on to here. With really slippery fish or with really large fish, you can also cut a keyhole. So you've got something to hang on and then pull back with. When you're skinning, you're driving forward with your right hand as much as you're pulling back. And that's pretty important. You want to keep that knife as flat as you can on the board. So then as you're pulling through there, pulling as much as that skin off as meat off the skin as possible. This skin would render off and fry really well too. If you can keep it flat, salt it really well, dry it out nicely, keep it flat and fry it, that comes up as crispy as a chip too. Takes quite a long time. It'll take like 8 minutes, 10 minutes in a pan to fry that off and get it crunchy. Or even on a sandwich press. Salt it really well, put it in the press, you end up with it's almost like a chip-like sort of an effect. Yield is around about that 50% mark. So if you get anywhere around that 50% mark today, I'll be really surprised. You've done a great job. It's not as easy. Sometimes you can cut through. You're applying too much pressure on all those radial bones. You can always see on the barra there's a bit of a gap here. That'll naturally separate away as you cut it. So you don't want to get caught up in this section and cut through to the other side too hard. Keep those fillets nice and clean and big, basically, is what you're looking for. But that'd be about 50%. In the factories nowadays, and at my brother's factory, certainly they aim the fish away from them. They just use a high-pressure hose, something you'd normally use like a karcher, and that blows all the scale off. It's fairly delicate as well compared to how I'd normally do it with that big drive through your right hand. You can end up bruising the fish a little bit or making it a little bit soft, which is sort of not what you're trying to do, really, trying to preserve that texture and that what's there as the fish.
Do you trim the belly?
Yeah, you can trim the belly, yeah, for sure. It's quite fatty, and it's not, for me, it's not an enjoyable amount of fat. Any of my Taiwanese or Japanese customers would ask me to leave that on particularly, and I normally only purchase that fillet anyway, that midsection portion. Whereas for most Australians or most Western tastes, it's a little bit too strong. Even rendering it off, it still retains quite a big amount of strength in that fat that's there. Whilst the rest of the fish is really clean and light, you definitely get that huge extra whack of fat there. Some people love it, it's a personal taste. If that was the case, normally this section here for retail is impossible to sell. Almost impossible anyway. To square this portion off and then get a normal size shaped fillet out of this is really quite difficult. So what you're doing, if you could take sashimi grade fish or you had access to that, you'd chop that off and you'd make ceviche from that. Barra would make a gorgeous ceviche, good amount of fat, good amount of sweetness as well, so you could work with quite a bit of different flavours there to incorporate into that. This tail section as well, some people don't particularly like, so you could get creative with what to do with this bottom section here. In retail, we normally smoke the tail section, so you end up with all lovely centre cut portions for display or on the plate, and then use these other cuts basically for other purposes. Ceviche would be great, really, really good, or smoking, definitely.